Welcome to Cybersecurity Luminaries, History and Heroes, a series aimed to highlight the profession's humble beginnings and the men and women who paved the road for all of us. This series is brought to you by Candy Alexander and Kaylin Sullivan, your co-hosts from the Cybersecurity Refined and Feral podcast.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Cybersecurity Refined and Feral. I'm Kaylin Sullivan.
And I'm Candy Alexander. We're co-hosts for the Cybersecurity Refined and Feral podcast, as Kaylin mentioned. But this happens to be a very special project and series that we're producing out of it. And it's called Cybersecurity Luminaries, History and Heroes. It's our way of paying homage to those individuals who have played a major role in shaping our cybersecurity profession through their visionary leadership. It is our hope that through these conversations with cybersecurity luminaries, members of our community will understand our collective history, lessons learned from those who started our profession, with hopes that we can stand truly on the shoulders of giants.
So today we're absolutely thrilled to welcome a true titan, a cornerstone of modern cybersecurity education.
That's right. Our guest is someone whose name is synonymous with hands-on defense. From pen testing to incident response, he's built the industry's workforce one course and one counter hack at a time.
He's also the author of the book Counterhack, a leader in the creation of rigorous real-world training, and for decades he has been one of the most visible and respected instructors at the SANS Institute. And when you talk about history and how we learned cybersecurity, you're talking about this man.
So please give a huge warm welcome to our legendary Ed Skoudis. Ed, thanks for joining us. We're so eager to hear about your history and your heroes as well.
My goodness. Thank you for the very kind introduction. I really appreciate it. It's great to spend some time with you. Thank you for your kind words.
Absolutely. So I, like you, have been around forever and a day, it seems. And when I first started in InfoSec, because that's what it was called back in the day, right, in the 80s and early 90s, there were two institutions. First was the CIS, which we all know about that. But the most respected, in my opinion, was SANS. And so I know you've been tied to that for a very long time, but I want to hear about you, Ed, and how you got your start in InfoSec/cyber, and then how did you get pulled into SANS?
Sure. Oh, so I was a computer enthusiast when I was in high school. I got my first computer, I think I was 13 years old. It was a VIC-20. From Commodore, and then I upgraded to the Commodore 64. Maybe I was 14 or 15 for that. I had a modem and would access various BBSs. This was back in the early to mid 1980s. Went to school and got my degree in electrical engineering with an emphasis on computer engineering, and that's from a hardware perspective. So I graduated from University of Michigan for that. And then I went to graduate school at Carnegie Mellon. And there I worked on distributed systems, a very CS, electrical engineering, and business-oriented degree. But the thing that got really interesting for me was when I left there, got my master's degree, and I went to work at Bell Communications Research. Mm-hmm. So this was the early 90s, and I was working on two technologies that I realized were dead ends. I was working on operator services, which you know, Candy, you know this, Kaylin, maybe not. You would call a number and talk to a human being and ask them for a phone number of somebody in another city.
How horrific.
It's amazing, yeah. So I was working on that and optimizing that. And I was also working on another technology, Kaylin, I'm sure you're vaguely familiar with, called payphones. Mm-hmm. And that's where you put coins into a machine and it would allow you to make phone calls and ask you for more coins. So I knew those were not long-term futures. We were optimizing for those. This was in 93, 94, 95. But then an opportunity came up working in information security, as you called it, Candy. That's what we called it then. At Bell Corp. Bell Communications Research was the part of Bell Labs that was split off when they split up AT&T. It was the part that was split off to work with the local phone companies. And the local phone companies were deploying IP networks and they were getting hacked. And I had an opportunity to go in and help do incident response. And this, again, is in sort of the mid-90s now, to do incident response on these hacked nascent phone networks, IP networks for the phone companies. And, one would get hacked. There were 7 baby Bells. 9X was one of them, and Bell Atlantic was another one, Southwestern Bell, Bell South, US West, etc. And one of them would get hacked, and then another one would call us and say, hey, 9X got hacked this way. Could you do that and see if you can get into our network? So I went from incident response to now we're doing penetration testing. And then we were doing that for the phone companies. And then we started getting calls from the banks saying, hey, can you hack us too, please? So we took what we were learning from the attacks against the phone network, using them against the phone network, then using them against banks and so forth. And it just all kind of came together. And it was exciting times. What is an actual pen test? Early in my career, I've been doing this over 29 years now. I just went to my 29th DEF CON. Earlier this year, I was at my 29th RSAC conference. And it's been interesting to watch that change. I consider myself a hacker, always have, part of the hacker community. And then you asked specifically how I got involved with SANS. So fast forward now to 1999, and I got an opportunity. So Gene Schultz, a dear friend of mine, I don't know if you know Gene, Candy, you do? Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, rest in peace. Gene is
Yes.
gone on now. But Gene told me about his great friend, Alan Paller, and said, I want to introduce you to Alan, and Alan wants you to do a presentation at the SANS event in May of 1999 at Baltimore Inner Harbor.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember doing the presentation. There were 300 people in the room. This was a big opportunity. I knew of SANS and how it did all this wonderful training and such, but I'm doing an evening talk for 90 minutes, and I'm presenting my heart out. It's about hacker attacks and how they break in and how they hide and all this stuff. And I remember Alan Paller was in the room. Stephen Northcutt was in the room. So Alan was the founder of SANS. Stephen was the person who was running SANS. Gene Schultz was a SANS instructor. They're in the room. 297 other people are in the room. And I'm presenting my heart out, doing everything I can. The audience seems to be enjoying it. And then halfway through my talk, somebody in the front row raises his hand. I said, yes. And he points at my feet and he said, your shoe's untied. Now, what are you going to do? Your shoe's untied. And I'm sitting there like calculating on the fly. Do I just ignore it and then trip over my shoes? Do I acknowledge it? Do I this or that? So just, ad-libbing, I said, I apologize to the front row if my feet don't smell well, but I kicked off my shoes and continued to present in my socks. And everybody laughed. It was like funny, audience engagement, whatever. And then I finished that, and I got a wonderful email from Alan. He was very pleased with the talk, asked me to come back and do a full day talk, which then became a 2-day talk, which then became a 4-day talk, which ultimately became the SANS 504 course. I was the original author of that course. And it is still today the best-selling SANS course there is. It's
so
on
who
Instagram.
was it?
Pardon?
Did you ever find out who it was that was just looking to it?
Just some guy who noticed my shoe was untied. And I looked down and he's right. So
talk about squirrel moments.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to kick it off and get it behind me. But that's sort of the origin story of my involvement with SANS, and also how SANS Security 504 was born. And then, of course, I handed it off to John Strand after several years. And he handed it off to Josh Wright, who's running it now. And, Josh works for me, and he's worked for me, gosh, it might be almost 20 years now. And it's been wonderful.
So we need to back up, because that was like,
Yeah.
There's a lot.
There's a lot to unpack here. So let's start with the time.
I have a question too.
Yeah. Okay, Kim, you go first.
So when you say Bell Labs, my immediate thought goes back to what was that book that had like the 3 different hacker stories in it that I lent from you, Candy?
Cyberpunk, was it?
Yes.
I have it actually.
Yes.
It's on my shelf over there. I have
Such
that.
a good book.
Yep.
But did you ever do any of the phone phreaking?
The phone phreaking was being done against the phone networks when I was there. And I
Ooh.
worked with the team that had to respond to a whole bunch of the phone freaks.
Yeah.
So I knew the folks that were on the other side of all those attacks.
Oh,
Captain Crunch. I had a chance to meet Captain Crunch once. He came to a
yeah.
SANS event, and we went out to dinner. Me and a bunch of other SANS instructors and good old Captain Crunch.
Yeah.
So I was of the generation after the phone freaking and stuff. I mean, we did BBSs,
Mm.
but we didn't do any of the in-band signaling stuff. The 2600 hertz. Although I do
Yeah.
have one of those Captain Crunch whistles on that table right over there.
So cool.
So I bought one as a piece of history.
Yeah.
But I worked with the people who dealt with those phone freaks. I myself was not. I was more in the BBSs and then the IP networks. And that's why
Yeah.
Bellcore said, hey, we need somebody who can do
Yep.
incident response against IP networks. Oh, this kid just got out of college where he was working on IP networks. So that's how I got my entry point.
So that's interesting because, like, I mean, it's so much fun doing this series because it's bringing back so many memories. Because I remember, that of course, back then, when I first got in, 2600 magazine was it, right? Like
Yep.
that was the thing. And
I have my
then
collection of issues of 2600 magazine. They're
you still
behind
have
me
them?
there. So I got all stuff all over the office. Yeah,
Of
from that
course you
era.
do.
Yeah.
We call it history. My husband calls it hoarding, but whatever.
my wife has called me a hoarder too, and everything has meaning and it's deep
It
memory. So it's not hoarding.
does.
Yeah.
So I also remember, back my very first security conference was in Baltimore, Inner Harbor, and it was a CIS conference. And I will never forget, like back then, the only people that went to these conferences were military or
Mm-hmm.
Bell Labs.
Yeah.
And then I'll never forget there was these two presenters from Bell Labs, and they were the quintessential software type guys. Like,
Mm-hmm.
so counter to the military folks, Intel,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
They came in with the tie-dye t-shirt, the shorts, the socks, and the sandals.
Yep.
And I'm there, people, my tribe, So it's funny because, again, bringing back the Bell Labs, Bell Research, it of course, my start came about with Kevin Mitnick, right?
Yep.
And he was a phone freaker, and then he got into the networking
He made
stuff.
the jump into IP networking and the attack against Shimomura in the takedown book.
Yes.
Yeah. Yep.
Yes.
But I do remember, the Bell Systems ethos and its involvement with early hackers. And, in some ways, the corporate side of the Bell system hated the hackers, but the technical side of the Bell system kind of respected their adventurism. I mean,
Yes.
look, maybe we got frustrated a couple times when they, brought stuff down, but the fact that they were exploring and wanting to understand the technology, there was maybe not a complete kindred spirit thing there, but there was
Mhm.
a certain thing, and that's changed largely now.
Yes.
But back in those days, it was pretty neat. And I remember going as a Bellcore employee to DEF CON. I think my first DEF CON was DEF CON 5,
Wow.
maybe 6, and just loving it and feeling at home, and just seeing all the hackers doing their hacker thing,
Yep.
and being able to say, hey, look, here's the technical guide that you've got to get that explains this thing or that thing. We were deploying the early out-of-band signaling network, the SS7 network, which was actually preceded by the SS6 network, but the SS7 was the first one really big. And I was writing messages for SS7 for interswitch communication back in those days, and then going to DEF CON and how they're trying to get into the SS7 network. It was lovely. What
It's
fun!
wild. Those really were, adventurous days. That's when exploration really was exciting,
Yeah.
both from a technical perspective, and I think, the hackers or counter hacking, folks, you received a level of respect from the engineering and technical community because you were them. You were just, shall I say, fondly and respectfully, an outcast because we wanted to test the limits of that capability, and they secretly always wanted to do that, I think.
I also think, if you look back on it, I do believe that they made us better and more secure. When I say they and us, I mean the hacker community trying to hack into the phone network, we being the people running the phone network, we knew we had to clean it up. It was a mess. It was a security nightmare. And if you think, and most people at the time didn't think of this, but it was important, the national security implications of the United States phone network and even the worldwide phone network being so weak, they forced us to up our game.
Yes.
And I think that continued for many years, and maybe even does until this day. You know, if you look at some of the early buffer overflow exploits and the worms that spread and attacks in the late 90s and early 2000s, that forced us to make our operating systems more secure, to make the networks more secure. We're so much better for the hacker community poking at us, back in those days.
I agree. And I think perhaps where it started to go wrong, shall I say, if that's even such a thing, is when, damn it, this happens all the time, when it becomes monetized.
Yes.
Money gets in the way of everything, doesn't it?
Yeah. And, with ransomware, absolutely. Now, it's very monetized. Cyber criminals come in there. Cyber criminals have been stealing credit cards and such for a long time and monetizing that through fraud and theft. So that did change things significantly. I also think, and we can get into more depth of this later if you want, but I strongly feel that we've maybe over-professionalized the cybersecurity industry. I was talking with some friends at DEF CON just this year about how it's so much more professional than it used to be. And there's nothing wrong with a certain level of professionalism. But, now it's a career and it's monetized, and there's all these degrees and there's certifications, which, look, I'm with the SANS Institute, so we have certifications, we have degrees. But I think there's a certain love of the game that has been lost by some because we've over-professionalized. So still having that spark, that hacker ethos, I think is a good and important thing, and not being just focused on it's a career. There's a certain drudgery to that. Look, I get it. We needed some professionalization, but I think we got too much.
I would have to agree from the feral viewpoint of this podcast. I want to be able to be myself and have fun with what I do.
Yeah, well said.
But I'll counter that we did need that. And I think it's a balance, just like everything else in life, right? And it's funny because you talk to various professionals, and I know you have, as well as I, and you can tell those that have that spark of passion. And no matter how bad the job gets and how professional and how corporatized or whatever, if that's such a word, it gets, it's the spark, it's the passion. And it goes back to when I was in the ISSA leadership doing a research survey with ESG. We did a research on the profession. And, people would say, it's a tough job, we're the scapegoat and everything else. But, so a reporter asked me, but why do you continue to do it? And it's the one line that repeatedly comes to mind, Ed, is, I don't know if you ever watched Mr. Robot. And he was more or less asked that question, why do you do it? And it's the answer was really simple. We just want to save the world. Right?
Yeah. And I do think that a lot of people are inspired by that, this notion of make the world a safer, more secure place, make the world a better place, the protection that we can afford. I think that is very, very good. But some people don't share that goal, and I'm certainly there's some pretty evil attackers that way, and then certain folks that are entirely focused on monetization. Now, some of that's not bad, monetizing things so we can make money and support our families and support our career and invest in the infrastructure and such. Some of that's good, but if that is your sole goal, I think you're missing the boat.
Yeah, I agree. So let's turn this around, because we've talked a bit about our profession, where we both come from, the adventurous Wild West, the good guy, bad guy, white hat, black cat, blah, blah. And then came the need, right, for certifications. So I have my interpretation of how and why they came about, but I'm tainted by the individuals such as Sandy Lambert and those, from ISC squared perspective. I want to hear your perspective as to the role of certification, because when it first started, the intent was different than where we are today.
Right.
So what, from your perspective, and I know Stephen Northcutt from SANS, he was the father of the GIAC,
GIAC.
right? Yeah.
GIAC certifications.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
So what is your interpretation of how and why the certification came about and what the intent meaning is?
So I remember I was new to the cybersecurity field in the mid 90s, and we were helping the phone companies secure their networks and working with the banks and such to do that. And there was a relatively new certification at the time called the CISSP.
Mm-hmm.
And the CISSP was very broad, but not super deep. But you could show that you were a cybersecurity practitioner. I'd been doing it a few years, and I sat for my CISSP exam in 1997. So I got my CISSP in 97 because I needed it to do my job. It was a requirement. I was working for Belcor, but to be hired as a consultant working with the banks and they required CISSP. So I got that in 97. And then I started teaching for SANS, as I mentioned, in 99. And I remember in late 99, Alan Paller came up to me and he said, "Hey, Ed, we're going to do something." He was bouncing up to me. He was so excited about this. I'm like, "What are we going to do?" He said, "We're going to come up with certifications." And I said, "Well, we're a training organization. We have the best training in the world. Why certifications?" And he said, "Because when a boss sends people to take a class, that boss wants to know they go home with some actual skills and haven't just wasted their time in class, or they aren't just book smart. So we want to create certifications that show actual technical competency." And that was the goal from GIAC from the start. And originally, it wasn't going to be just one certification. It was going to be 9 certifications. And mine was to be known as GCIH, the GIAC Certified Incident Handler. It was the 4th in the series of 9. That's where 504, it was we called it track 4, and it was the 4th one. Yep. So there was what became 401, 502, 503, 504. So that was the goal of it, to measure competency gained in a class or potentially on the job, so that the boss knew that the people taking class were getting some actual value out of it. And that led to this idea that Alan ingrained in me called the SANS Promise. And the SANS Promise is something that still is in the DNA of SANS to this day. And it goes like this. Everything that you learn in a SANS class or on a SANS cyber range, you will be able to apply the very next day that you get back to the office. And I remember Alan telling me, Alan, again, the founder of SANS, he said, when you're looking at every class that SANS has, every hour of every class, every 10 minutes of every class, in fact, every slide of every class, you have to look at that through the lens of the SANS Promise. And if it's not fulfilling that promise, take it out. It doesn't belong. So that's sort of, the motivation for those certifications way back when they started 26 years ago, and how we kind of view it. Now there's over 50 SANS certifications, et cetera, et cetera. It's really proliferated, which is another big change in the industry.
Yes.
I never thought it would get this big. I mean, when we were doing this back in the day, it was esoteric and weird. I remember going to my 10-year high school reunion and people asked me what I did for a living. I said, I do penetration testing against banks. And they're like, "Wait, you rob banks for a living?" Robbing the bank, they pay me to hack them. Sounds like robbing a bank to me. But nowadays people kind of get that. Oh, that's cool, right? And I mean, they hold penetration testers in high regard, I suppose. But the industry's changed. It became very professionalized. It became much, much bigger. It became much more monetized. All of those changes, some of them necessary, some of them maybe not so good. Right. Many of them predictable, I think. Although I never thought it would get this big. That is just crazy to me, how big this industry is.
Well, I'm so happy to hear that, because I tell you, again, working as a consultant the past, I don't even know how many years. I hate to think about it because I'm not that old, right?
Me neither.
Right, exactly. And so when I think about some of the engagements I had, for example, I had this engagement where I went and I worked with the security team, and they were very technical. And so they had me come in as a fractional CISO to do policies, right? Mm-hmm. Because that's what CISOs do, not necessarily. But I did up a AUP, an acceptable use policy. Mm-hmm. And so the interesting thing was to me is that these guys are really good at the technical tools.
Yeah.
And I said, okay. And so like this was on gateway filtering, right? And I said, okay, well, they came to me and said, well, what is the configuration requirements for the gateway filtering? And I'm there, well, let's break it down and look at the AUP. And they could not translate
Mm.
what that meant. And I know you do, and Kaylin does, but it's like going through the acceptable use. What are the websites you can go to? What are those you can't, which are questionable? Set your filtering rules to that. I walked through that exercise with them, and it was amazing to me. And time after time, I have found individuals that understand, to your point, that we're so specific in our profession now.
Yeah.
I only know how to configure firewalls
Right.
or whatever. I don't know the big picture and how this fits in and how it supports, the policies. And to that point, even CISOs, right? The biggest thing right now is, how does the CISO align with the business? They can't. We just, by nature of our training, have been so, laser beam focused on our task at hand. We're not understanding the correlation and the context. And so I'm so happy to hear, like at SANS, you can take those skills and bring it back and apply.
It's really an important thing to be able to take what you're doing on a very technical level and then translating that, to use your word, to translate that, to explain the business importance of it, to be able to talk with non-technical but still cybersecurity folks about what you've done in their terminology, especially when it gets to leadership like a CISO or even presenting before the board. That is something. I serve on 3 boards right now, and watching sometimes that translation between the technical and the board works very beautifully, and that's a great thing. And sometimes it breaks down completely. So there's a lot that can be learned about talking to management, talking in business terms, talking in actual risk terms. Fundamentally, cybersecurity is all about managing risk. And part of managing risk is making a decision about when to accept a risk versus when to spend money to mitigate the risk. And you will accept some risks. Now, you may lie to yourself about what those risks are so that you don't think they're there. But somebody's got to call you on that too. So this is what makes it interesting and fun to me, is to do that translation between the technical and the business risk, and doing that sometimes at pretty high levels of management.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to tell my classes, when it comes to penetration testing, and I have a company that does penetration testing too. 19 people at CounterHack do penetration testing. And what is pen testing and why do we do it? One answer is, our job is to find security flaws before real attackers do, so we can fix them. Yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, but there's a better answer. It's a true answer.
Right.
But a much better answer is, our job is to help the organization better understand its security risks and the vulnerabilities that cause those risks, so that they can prioritize resources to mitigate those risks that might hurt them the most. That's a better answer, because now you're at a different layer of communication and discussion and prioritization, because you don't want to mitigate the risks that really can't hurt you or that are very unlikely. I mean, to the extent that you can, if it's cheap to mitigate them, but some of them are pretty expensive. So it's this whole risk discussion that I think penetration testing can help inform, rather than just find the flaws and fix them.
Right, exactly. And I think that's where a lot of CISOs, if I could be so bold to say, go wrong. They're coming at the C-suite and the board of directors like, these are the vulnerabilities we found, and we mitigated these, XXX, and we saved, the organization from, absolutely annihilation and demise. And it's like, wow, okay. It's like, what do you say to that? And meanwhile, they're like, yeah, okay. And then, okay, well, you fixed all the problems. I guess you don't need an investment. Whereas the conversation you just stated, we do penetration testing in order to identify the areas of risks and the level of investment needed to better position the business to operate.
Right. Exactly.
I I would even leverage the pen test as a revenue driver too, because customers expect to see it.
Well, they do. If you don't do pen testing, you could get in big trouble from a regulatory perspective. I mean, the whole governance thing requires it in many organizations today. And then, of course, if you do get hacked, that's pretty bad news, right? So, yeah. So, now pen testing is not a perfect endeavor, and there will be flaws that go undiscovered by that. That's why pen testing is part of a well-rounded security program that includes configuration review, audit, of course, a sound security architecture. It is one facet of it and doesn't cover up for limitations or flaws in the other facets too.
Agreed.
Yeah.
So let's get back a little bit, because again, you're the big guy, the leader of SANS. So let's talk about that, because as I mentioned, that has to be one of the most, I don't want to say oldest, been around the longest, I'll say that,
Been around a
and
long time.
most respected. So, and again, I know we've mentioned a couple of really important names like Alan Paller, who was the founder of SANS, and of course Stephen Northcutt, which back in the day I had the pleasure and opportunity to meet and know both of those gentlemen. But let's talk about Alan for a moment. He was quite the visionary. He was a remarkable man, because not only did he found SANS, the education institute.
Yep.
But he also, if I recall, he even started to get involved with some public policy in DC and whatnot.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So, Alan was a visionary, and I think the world of him. I miss him, every day. He passed away a few years ago. He was in many ways like a father to me. Alan was doing some work with big data back in the 80s, and then got this sense that the computing infrastructure was going to grow more important, more complex. So in the late 80s, he founded SANS. Now, SANS originally stood for Sysadmin, Network, and Security. So he wasn't sure which of these things was going to be the most important, but he knew that system administrators, networking people, and security people were going to become very important. So he put this thing together that would combine all of them. And he started offering classes. They were either like 2-hour workshops or 1-day classes. And what he noticed was there was a lot of conflicting advice. So you could take a Windows NT class from this person and a Windows NT class from that person, and they tell you completely different things that should be your priority. And people were getting frustrated. So Alan early on tried to make consensus. What is consensus for how to harden Windows? What is consensus? And that's when SANS really became focused on the security piece of it.
Yep.
Yeah, the sysadmin to enable security, the network to enable security, but the security piece of it became really big. And he asked me to work with Stephen Northcutt and others to come up with a consensus for how do you do incident response when somebody gets hacked.
So I'm going to interrupt you right there for one moment, because my goodness, Ed, do you not see the parallel of where we are today? A consensus. We're hearing conflicting information on AI and advice in security, and there needs to be a consensus. Here we go again. And this is why I wanted to do this series, to talk about our history so we can reflect, pull those lessons from the beginning and pull them forward and thread them into our solutions today. So
Alan was always so big about consensus, and that consensus led to the creation of those classes, which then led to the GX certifications. He also did it another time. There were all these different hacks happening, large-scale breaches and such, and Alan was talking with some of his friends at various government agencies, incident handlers, and he said, are there like a top 10, 15, maybe 20 things we could do that would eliminate 80 or 90% of the breaches? And he came up with the top 20 critical controls.
Yep.
And he actually pulled me into that project. He said, Ed, can you work on establishing a consensus of however many controls are needed? Here's a certain baseline of them. And I spent the entire summer of, I think, 2008 or 2009 trying to hammer that thing into consensus. So I wrote the original version of the top 20 critical controls. Many other people took it over after I did, James Taralla and many more, and built it into what it is today. But that was another Alan Paller consensus project. And he did that throughout his life, just finding areas where, hey, this is broken, this is hard to understand. Different so-called experts are trying to guarantee their expertise by showing that they're different from everybody else, which is just useless for us all.
Yes.
Let's hammer this into some consensus to give people real and practical advice. So that was one of Alan's motivating forces.
I feel like we hear that really often in this series, is a lot of these people that have been the luminaries and heroes over the history of cybersecurity often lean on the community and give back to the community, and ask for input from the community in order to, make their goals.
That was what Alan was all about.
Successful.
And then to enable the community, one thing I learned from Alan so well is to identify very talented people who are uplifting and positive, and to work with them to build something and try to make the world safer and more secure. Alan was so good at that. And I learned from him, and would talk with him all the time about that. And we try to carry that legacy forward as much as we can. There's a great thing on the SANS website. If you go to sans.org/free, you could see the free resources that SANS gives to the community. I'm proud to say that sans.org/free was my idea, because we had all these resources all over the place. It's like, well, why don't we put them all under one umbrella? But there's a bunch of tools in there and a whole bunch of stuff. I thought of that because it's like, what would Alan do? And I often think, how would Alan approach this problem? What would Alan do? It's because he was so influential. And I do have a picture of him actually hanging on my wall right over there. Yep, he got a good smile on his face, and he's looking at me. And making sure that I do my best to uphold that mission. So.
Yes. Well, he was an incredible individual and had obviously left an impression on me and probably every person that he ever met. He had that charisma, that the fortitude to do the right thing, and as you mentioned, the ability, the magic to see the gap, and then not just see the gap, because we all see gaps, but he had the magic to be able to pull together the resources collectively and collaboratively to fill it, and never took credit for any of this. Really. I mean, really.
And he always had a twinkle in his eye, and he'd always promote all those people that helped him do that. So much great stuff there. And yeah, I miss him. I really do.
I think he's probably, we talk about heroes, right? History and heroes. And he's probably one of the most in my opinion, under acknowledged and known heroes in our history. He really...
Well, he should be known better. He really made a mark on this industry. Not just in SANS. He was one of the original founders of the Center for Internet Security, so CISecurity.org, and so many other ideas he had. Some of them he was very public about his involvement with, and others he was not very public at all, just encouraging people behind the scenes to do things to get them done in the industry. He was a fountain of ideas all the time. And Alan knew everybody, and everybody knew Alan. And my goodness, yeah.
So now that you're in the big chair, what do you see as some, and of course, I don't expect you to share any big secrets, but where's your vision for SANS and the future?
Yeah. So education is changing dramatically. One of the things that we see at SANS is the need for training in how to do your job with AI, which I'm not telling you anything that you don't know, but it's really important nowadays you can say, well, leverage AI. And a lot of people think, so, okay, I just got to prompt this thing appropriately. But it's so much more than that. And it's so different for the different capabilities in this industry. Leveraging AI as a penetration tester is very different than leveraging AI as an incident responder, which is very different from leveraging it as a SOC analyst and so forth. So SANS, and I've been pushing as hard as I can, SANS has been integrating AI into as many of its classes as possible. And, we collect measurements, like how many SANS classes is AI substantively in? And then, okay, what does substantively mean? How many slides is it measured on? How many labs are being done? How is it? So there's that piece of how do you leverage AI to
Nice.
do your job better, and making sure that that's out there, because that's just what modern cybersecurity professionals need. The other thing is leveraging AI as a classroom teaching element. And this has been interesting and somewhat controversial because we have some amazing instructors and we don't want to take anything away from the instructors. That said, we are doing experiments not to have an AI instructor. No, we want to have real
Right.
practitioner instructors. But that said, we're doing some experiments where you can say, hey, to an AI. So you've got your instructor, and an amazing instructor, and you're learning a lot from that person. But there's an automatic workbook that you have where you could say, I like basketball. So can you give me a bunch of analogies in basketball and use basketball terms? And then the AI can dynamically do that. Now you got to worry about hallucination and it going kind of off the rails. There's a real instructor there to backstop it.
Right.
But so we're doing some experiments with that. So AI as teaching elements, but not AI as the instructor. The other thing is, SANS core products are 6-day classes plus the certification. And those are great. And I think those serve the community well. But they're also, shorter form SANS courses, a day or 2 or 3, that I think we can get a lot of lessons into people. One of the things that I work on at SANS a lot is cyber ranges. So, we're trying to take our cyber ranges and make them more affordable and make the learning more quick. And, one example of that is we just launched a cyber range back in April of this year that is a quarter of the price of the product that it replaces. The product that originally was there was $2,000. The new one is $499.
Nice.
And we've seen the sales of it go way up. I mean, they're more than fourfold what the old one was. So there's definitely a need for that. Or SANS Holiday Hack Challenge, which we just launched recently. SANS Holiday Hack Challenge is in its 22nd year, but we just launched the newest one a couple of weeks ago. And for that one, I had this idea of micro challenges. So there's 15 So SANS Holiday Hack Challenge is SANS free gift to the community. We have 20,000 people play it every year, and it's a cyber range with Santa Claus and the elves and all that kind of fun stuff. Anyway, the micro challenges, the idea is it takes you 10 minutes, maybe 15 to solve it.
Nice.
And you get a quick dopamine hit. It's fun. You laugh, you learn. It gives you one lesson on one really important thing that you need to know. And we have that. We also have 3 or 4 what we call capstone challenges. And those might take you an hour or 2 or 3 because we want to keep something like that in there. But the micro challenges are a big hit this year. So that's kind of a re-envisionment of how we can more quickly get people the knowledge they need. So it's teaching AI in the classroom. Mm-hmm. It's using AI to help the teaching process and then to make things more quick learning, dynamic, affordable. All of those things I think are exciting parts of the future.
I love that. I think a lot that I hear about are people worried and about AI taking over my job, but by you incorporating it into existing curriculum, you're showing how it's assisting you. It's not taking over your job.
Right.
It's assisting you, and that's the way it should be. So I love that, and I
think and then showing the human where they can fit in the loop even
Yes.
more valuably now than ever. There's this old saying, old, it's a year or 2, maybe 3 years old. You will not lose your job to AI. You will lose your job to someone who knows how to leverage AI better than you.
Yes.
And there's a lot of truth in that. So how can we enable people to be more effective with AI and not be replaced by it? That's the goal. That's what we're working on in every SANS class.
Cool. All right. So I want to, before we wrap this up, I want to ask you, what is the most crucial piece of advice you could give an inspiring cybersecurity hero today?
So I think, I look at my own team and who's most valuable on my team. Whether the team be, the penetration testing team, the SANS team, you have to be flexible. That's the thing that makes you valuable. Flexible in your use of technology, especially flexible in your use of AI now. The ability to adapt to changing circumstances. is so crucial. Look, I'm a big fan of playbooks, incident response playbooks, pen test playbooks, but the playbook can only get you so far. The playbook codifies the knowledge that you have of a generic thing, but then when you apply it, everything changes, right? And so you got to be able to flexibly apply your playbook, flexibly change your career. This is advice I give to not only people on my own team, but young people getting out of college. They may have studied this or that, and it's like, well, now you're going to go for your career. You might have to flexibly pivot into adjacent technologies or ideas. That flexibility is maximally crucial. And, if I look at my own team, the people that are most valuable on my team are those that are most, they're all brilliant. They really are.
Yeah.
But who's the most flexible in their ability to adapt and leverage different technologies, find security flaws in different technologies, harden different technologies? That flexibility is so important. And AI can enable that flexibility as long as you're brave enough, experimental enough, and you dive into it.
Fair enough. And then just one last, usually ask our guests in this series, who's your hero? And I think loud and clear, we already know it's Alan.
Alan Powell, yeah.
So,
I have others, but Alan stands out certainly the most.
And it's funny, yeah. I won't go there, but yes, you've named a few of my heroes already, like Dean Schultz. I love that.
I was going to say Gene is up there too. I miss Gene so much. Yeah.
But so, those are memories we love and we cherish and we hold near and dear to our hearts. Let me turn this around. How do you want to be remembered?
Wow, that's a tough question. I think, if I look back on my career, Alan Paller once asked me, "What so far has been the high?" What he said? He said, "What do you think of the best thing you did in your career was?" And I said, "Don't ask me that question," because he wanted to ask me at the RSA stage, "What's the best thing you've done in your career?" I'm like, "I don't want to answer that. I want you to ask me, what am I most thankful for having the opportunity to have done?" So he phrased it that way. So what are you most thankful for? And the opportunity to be the original author of SAN Security 504 and to be able to teach that to so many people over the decades. And then to watch that, I'm so thankful also that John Strand took it over from me and then handed it off to Josh Wright. I'm thankful to have been a part of the 504 ecosystem and then the SANS ecosystem more generally. The opportunities afforded to me by Alan, that's what I'm most thankful for. Whether somebody remembers my hand in that, it's a different matter. But I know I'm thankful for having had that opportunity.
You're a very gracious individual, and I appreciate that.
It's from the heart. It's from the heart. Thank you.
We feel that. It transcends across that screen, Ed. So again, you're a very gracious individual, and we appreciate you. We appreciate you joining us in this conversation. I can't believe that it has flown by so quickly. It was absolutely wonderful. So
it's a joy to talk with you, Kaylin, and you too, Candy. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I wish you the very best, and let's stay in touch, okay?
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. So I'm gonna help wrap this up. Again, thank you, Ed. It's been a pleasure. And for all of our listeners out there, if you could give us a like, thumbs up. If you have questions, reach out to us. And I guess until then.
Until next time, stay secure, stay refined.
And don't be afraid to get a little bit feral.